Ever asked, how do I install fencing? What do I need to be concerned with? The Handyman Pros are going to have a discussion on fencing. Welcome to the Handyman Pros radio show. Home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help save you time, money, and aggravation. This edition is entitled, On Guard! The Handyman Pros discuss fencing. To help me explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy John. John, what's been going on this week?
Hey, Larry, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. It's kind of funny. I was over at one of the houses that we've been working on, and I was, their gate is all screwed up on their fence, and I've got to rebuild that gate, new hinges and so on and so forth. But I got to thinking about, the whole fence that they had put up around there, and then so one thing led to another, and I see all these big fences in my area and things like that. So I know that you used to do fencing, you used to work for a fencing company, and I think it's one of the things that we all kind of drive by and we see all these fences, and it's just not as simple as just, there's a bunch of wood and stuff just standing there,
Yeah, right.
So, so I thought, hey, I'll ask you about, share some of your experience with fencing and help out the audience of fences.
Well, that actually sounds like a plan. So I have to throw in my little bit of country humor. So growing up in the country as a kid, and people used to ask me, so what sports did you play? And I say, well, I was on the fencing team, right? And they'd go, really? And I'd go, yep, we could lay 400 yards a day, baby. We were getting it.
That's right.
So everybody has a little, that's why we called this one On Guard. We had to talk about fencing. That's right.
Olympic.
Yeah.
You were in the Olympics fencing.
I was on the Olympic fencing team. That's right. All right, Johnny. So I know a little bit about fencing. I'm not going to say I'm an expert, but I've done enough fence in my days growing up. I worked in high school. We did fencing around where I grew up. We had 60 acres. I did a bunch of fencing there. I've done multiple types of fencing. So ask me some questions about fencing.
So I guess, if I was going to put up a fence around my house, I would have some questions. And, I think it goes back to some of the things that we've talked about with other projects. Really, what's your goal for this fence? Are you trying to, keep a dog in? Is it a privacy thing?
Do tall fences make good neighbors? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. All those kind of things. So, can you help us out a little bit about what kind of the types of fences, first of all?
Yeah, so there is a huge number of fences. I mean, and as you drive around in your car now, you're going to start noticing these different types of fences. So there's everything from, what we would call just a simple barbed wire fence, right, which is basically somebody has strung barbed wire up largely to keep livestock in or out, I guess, either way. Because remember, fences work two ways. They keep things in and they keep things out. There's simple barbed wire. There's wire fence. There's horse fence, like three post horse fence, or sometimes four slotted horse fence. There's what they call true privacy fence, which is solid. Basically it's solid. It's usually done out of planks, but it's solid. Gosh, what else? I don't know. There's dog fence, just like invisible fence, if we want to talk a little bit about that.
Cyclone fences, or
there's chain link fence. There's so many different things. I guess when we get into it, it really does go back to what your goal is. Like my fences at my house have guard towers on them, and they have never mind. That's a different issue. Different fence towards what's your goal. So let's just talk about, for example, let's say you've got a dog, you want to keep your dog in, and if you just have a dog and say you want to keep a dog in, you got a bunch of different choices, right? So you can do an electric or you can do an invisible fence, right, which is basically they run a wire underground, they hook it up to this thing, and you have to train your dog that when it gets close to this thing it beeps and then it goes off, right? So and that is a training program, but that they actually work pretty well. And we just that's a very, very simple install. It's usually done in less than a day. And it's not terribly expensive compared to some of the other types of fences, and it's somewhat effective. I think one of the big things that I've heard about invisible fence with dogs, and I don't want to get into a long discussion on it, is while it keeps your dog in, it doesn't keep other animals out. And
that's correct.
And so that can be a concern for your dogs. I want to tell you, so I owned Jack Russell Terriers. And I will tell you, if you're going to put in an invisible fence and you own Jack Russell Terriers, save your money, because they will blow through that fence in no time. That thing will shock them, and they do not care, and they keep on going. But anyway, I have lots of Jack Russell stories when it comes to fences, because fences are very interesting with Jack Russell Terriers. So anyway, so determine what you want. But fencing can work in multiple ways. So you can put up a big privacy fence, and that can also keep your dog in, right? So it has multiple uses. And again, when we talk about privacy fence, so think about it. Think about what you're trying to do. If you want to create that oasis in your backyard, you have to think about you say you want to use a privacy fence. So now you have to think about how tall a privacy fence do you want? Do you want 6 feet? Do you want 8 feet? Do you want 10 feet? Do you want taller than that? And correspondingly, there's a bunch of different things that go to the different types of fences. If you're looking at decorative fences, there's just a plain old picket fence, if you want to call it that, and they come in different heights as well. There's horse fence is often used as a decorative fence, and it actually comes in different material types. So there's different things that you can do with that. So kind of figure out exactly what it is that you want to do. I want to tell a quick story on horse fence, right? So they make vinyl horse fence, which is what I would suggest if you're going to do it as a decorative fence. But please, 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 if you have horses, don't use vinyl fence, because the horse will lean against it and push it apart, and then he's gone. So again, use wood fences for horse fence, right? And John, you know that because you've done horses. So,
so these, like I said, there is a bunch of different fences, and let me kind of jump here too. So if I pick out the fence that I want for a specific, the effectiveness of the fence and what I'm going to use it for. And let's just say it's a privacy, kind of a privacy fence, okay, and that'll kind of double as a dog. I can put my dog back there too,
put your
right?
Dog back there. Yep.
So it's just not putting a bunch of poles in the ground, is it? There's a lot of things you have to consider when you're going to put up a fence. I mean, you just don't start the job. You might have to get a permit.
Yeah.
Consult the homeowners association and things like that, right?
Yeah. So we'll call that regulatory issues, right? So there's, depending on where you live and depending on the situation that you have, a couple of things, these kind of play into each other. So first thing is, if you're going to do your property line, like let's say you want to fence in your whole yard, be very careful to know exactly where your property line is. Neighbors get very, very angry when you build things on their property, particularly fences. Now, they love having a fence on the yard, but we used to do a setback of at least 6 inches, so we'd always have just a little bit of space on the inside. And I want to just address some things. This is if you're going to install your own fence, right? So if you're going to install your own fence and you don't have a proper transit and you don't have all this stuff, give yourself a little bit of leeway in that room. Don't go and try to install right up to the line, because if you're off, you're just creating a problem you really don't want to deal with. People get there's a lot of turf battles that go on over fencing. So that's one thing. HOAs for sure. Make sure if you have an HOA, make sure you get it cleared through your HOA, because they'll come and between that and the regulatory, the city, the town, whatever, they will make you take down fences. So, and you can spend a lot of money and end up having it taken down. I wanted to get into, and to your point, it's not as simple as you just think, right? So you think, gosh, how do I do? You just go dig post holes and put them in there.
Right.
Well, there's a certain amount of truth to that, but you have to consider some other things. Like, so what kind of soil do you have? Are there trees in the way?
Yeah.
Right?
So before you get into that, I just want to hit the regulatory thing. Have they done? Do companies? And should we be pulling a survey or something on your land to make sure you know exactly where your property line is?
I guess it depends on how well you know your neighbors, right? I mean,
or your own property line.
Or your own property line, right?
Because if you ask anybody, where's my property line, they're probably going to give you kind of a kind of sorta, unless you live in a very squared off kind of situation,
right?
But I can tell you where mine is, but I wouldn't bet on it. You know.
So having worked for a professional fence company, what we used to do is we actually used to go find the pins, right? So there's pins on the corners of your property.
Right.
And we would actually draw a line from pin to pin. So,
Right.
so we would stick a stake in the ground, just depending on the topography and depending upon the take of the land. We would actually find the pins with the property lines, and again, we would shoot it if we had a transit. So we would shoot it if it wasn't where we could snap a line, meaning draw a string from end to end. We would actually shoot the transit, and we would look and have that idea. And then, so folks, how a transit works is it's basically a telescope, and you look down it, and if you can see, like as you go to put things up, you can see where it moves over that line. And if it occludes your view, you're too far over. But you can just snap a line. Basically you just take a line, you pull it out between your property lines. Now, don't miss a pin if there's a third pin in there. If you go on most GIS systems, you're going to have an idea of where your property lines are, but it's not exact. The pins are the exact numbers, right?
Yeah.
So if you can't find your pins, you might want to have a survey done, and you can get just a lot line survey done. So it's not a full survey, it's not a full on cost, but it's not a bad idea. But have an idea, and most people have an idea. And if you're a couple of feet inside, you never have to worry, right?
Yeah.
You never
Sure.
have to worry. And
Sure.
so that's does that answer your question, John?
Yeah.
Does that give you the idea?
It does. It does. So getting back now to, so let's say that we know where we're going to put the fence, and you were telling me that you would use just a post hole, digger, right?
Depends on the length and the size of the job, right? So
because I was going to say, like you were just going to touch on the soil, and I'll let you go there for a sec. I'll let you, explain that for a second. But, where we live around here, there's a lot of hard, either rock or there is a lot of clay. And I just, I've used post hole diggers before, but man, I'm telling you, that seems like it's a lot of work putting in fence posts with those things.
So we were going to talk about soil type. So growing up, when I was doing fencing, working for a full-time company in Western New York, the soil was very loamy, right? So it was brown, or it was dark brown in color, and it was relatively loose. It dug well, like you could dig it with a post hole digger and dig it pretty well. You still always would run into rocks and things, believe it or not, and I don't care where you were, rocks or tree roots or whatever. So we always had at least one, sometimes two or three, depending on the number of people were on the crew. We would have a couple of digging bars, and what a digging bar is basically, it's a big iron bar that has a kind of a somewhat wide plate at the bottom, and it was usually sharpened down. It wasn't like axe sharp, but it was pointed, so you could dig in and you could take and dig a rock out, or actually move a rock out of the way and then pick it up with the shovel, or you could blast through a rock with it. I mean, it was almost like a rock hammer, and you just take, it's heavy, it probably weighs 25, 30 pounds, and you just use kinetic energy. You just basically lift that thing up and slam it down. Not for the faint of heart. I mean, if fencing is tough work, and I don't care, even if you go in with a post hole digger on a fence, we got post hole diggers stuck, right? They'd grab a root or something and they dig, and then you ended up digging the post hole digger out. And that happens.
Yeah. Let me pause you there. Cause when I say post hole digger, I meant, the kind that you would slam down in the ground and then, open up and pull out the dirt.
Right.
Everybody knows those. And you're talking now about you're talking about like a gas operated, like just a big auger bit.
Yeah, big auger bit. That's correct. I should have been more clear.
Yeah,
talking about an auger
bit. You can get those things stuck.
Yeah, and if you're using a manual one where it's like two guys hanging onto it, and you catch a rock, you're getting a really interesting ride. I'm just saying. So when we were doing big runs, up when I worked on them, and I've done it here as well. I've done some jobs here. We actually rented a small tractor you can do it either with a Bobcat, or you can do it with a tractor that has a PTO on it, and you'd actually get one that's PTO mounted. And we actually, the fencing company I worked for did not own one of those hand ones, because they were almost more work than they were worth, because you'd grab a rock, and I mean, two guys would be swinging around the thing like you're on a carousel, and they were almost harder to use. So we just had a small tractor that had that had them on there. And now I see they've got these walk behind bobcats that have them on them too.
Yeah, we saw that on a job that one time.
Yeah, and they work really, really well. We didn't have those back in the day because they hadn't been developed yet. So this was quite a number of years ago. And plus, where we were most of the time, like if it was less than about literally like 400 feet, we dig them by hand because trust me, 2 guys with a post hole digger and 1 guy on a bar, you'd be amazed how fast you can dig a hole in loamy soil. Here in North Georgia in the clay, if it's wintertime and the clay is wet, it's pretty easy dig. In the summertime, forget it. It's like concrete. No way. I don't do fencing in Georgia in the summer at all. Plus, it's too hot. It's too hot. But anyway, those are things to think about, right? Those are things to think about. And then, too, I was talking about trees. Do not nail your fence to a tree.
I see that. It's funny you mention that because everybody out there knows that that trees get bigger.
Yes.
and they move, but I see this all the time.
Particularly privacy fences, right? Where it lifts up the privacy fence.
Yep.
And it creates a big gap up underneath it. If you have a tree in a way, you need to make a tough decision, and that is, do I cut the tree down and then have the stump ground out? I mean, literally. Or you go around it. Either way.
Right.
And going around it can be really very difficult. So just be aware. Sometimes you change the whole trajectory of where the fence goes. Running a fence through the woods is really tough. I'm just going to be honest. It's expensive because of some of the things that go along with doing it. And from a DOA standpoint, you're going to do a lot of digging and a lot of root busting. And it really can be very, very tough. But anyway, worry about those kinds of things. But yeah, you just dig and you want to dig. And again, it depends on the area that you're in, and it depends if you're in a colder climate, you've got to be down below the frost line. If you're not below the frost line, what happens is that the ground will heave that fence. It will actually take those posts, move them up and down, and shift that fence, screws everything up. In the south, it's not quite so bad, but you still need to be down a good 2 feet, in general. And 2 feet doesn't seem like that much until you're digging 80 post holes. Then you're like, wow, I just got a whole lot of exercise. So
now when somebody's putting in their own fence in a certain area, how do they find out where the frost line is?
It's usually out there. I mean, the areas are zoned. And you can talk to a plumber too. And if you talk to a plumber, hey, how deep do you bury your water lines? Your supply lines for your water, and they'll tell you 2.5 feet, 3 feet, whatever. They'll give you an idea.
Good. That's a good tip right there.
If you have no other resource, just call a plumber and ask them. Tell them I'm doing a fence. How deep do you guys bury your water supply lines for frost reasons? And they'll tell you. They know. They know because they can't have their pipes freezing underground, right? And John, you grew up in Chicago, so you know how you guys are actually deeper than we were in Western New York because you guys are colder, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Right. Now, when you guys were doing this, just kind of getting back in your setting, did you ever talk to the neighbors and things like that? Tell them you were going to put up a fence.
Good idea to talk to your neighbors about putting up a fence.
I got to tell you that, when my neighbors put up fences and they put them up, they're very tasteful. I had no problem with it, but they never consulted me about it. And I would have said, hey, fine. But, to your point earlier that there's a lot of turf wars that can go on.
Yeah. Well, tall fences make good neighbors.
Yeah.
It just depends. It depends. Personally, as a personal thing, I would ask my neighbors. We would get it working for a fence company. We would get the neighbors would come out every time. Hey, and the question was, hey, what are you doing? Well, we're out here.
Yeah.
We're just digging. We're actually testing for. We're digging for oil. And
right.
I don't know why we're putting these wooden sticks in the ground. But blah blah blah.
Now, when you put in, so now you're putting in a post, you're digging a holes, you're putting in a post. Are you putting concrete on the bottom of those posts, or are you just setting them in the soil, or how does that usually work?
So depends on what your goals are, depends on what your fence is going to be used for, and also depends on what the soil conditions are. So again, drawing on Western New York and loamy soils where we had good drainage, we generally did not. Well, I take that back. Depending on the kind of fence we were doing, we generally, if it was a wooden fence, we did not put it in concrete. Now we used pressure treated posts because they were direct contact with soil. But we use a pressure treated post, and we would just tamp. We could actually the other side of that digging bar. There's a big round flat thing, and that's called part of the tamping. So you fill it up with dirt and you tamp that thing in. And as you tamp it in, you put a level on the post because you want it vertical, right? And you'll now, as I tell you that, you'll go out and see posts that aren't vertical, and you'll laugh. You'll go, yeah, the guy didn't have a level. But you tamp it in, and you make it tight. And literally, that thing is now, it's really set. Now, I've put posts in here in Georgia where I've done the same thing, and here it actually in the clay, it's almost better. Now, the downside here is that the clay holds water, so it doesn't drain as well. But so it just depends. It really depends on the customer and what their goal is and what they're trying to do, plus the type of material you're using. So we did some cedar fences up north, and that's the same thing. It's very bug and rot resistant. So whatever you put in the ground, you want it to be bug and rot resistant. Concrete is bug and rot resistant, obviously. If you're doing a chain link fence, now I wouldn't suggest anybody tries to do a chain link fence DOA because there's some special tools and there's some things you can do. You can do it, but you need to really watch a tremendous number of YouTube videos on doing it. It's really heavy. It takes a lot of people, and it's got some nuance to it to chain link if you want to do it. But all chain link fence is put in with concrete because you actually have to draw pressure on it. And so, as you're drawing that pressure on it, it's got to really be secure. Those posts really, really need to be secure. On wooden fences too, if you are hanging a gate, you generally want the posts that the gate is hanging on in concrete. Again, they're John, we've talked about.
That's a good point right there.
Load moments, right? Load moments, and that gate, believe it or not, depending. I don't care if it's a 3-foot gate; it's a 3-foot lever, right?
Right. That's right. That's right. That's a good tip. Speaking of gates, there's all kinds of gates. So it goes kind of back to what the goal is in this thing. There's all. I mean, you're going to drive a tractor through there. Are you just have a man door there? Are you, what kind of, man size? What's there's all kinds of gates.
Tons of gates. I mean, and tons of different ways to do gates, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right. That's another good point.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of that planning thing. Get on Pinterest or get on any place where you can see fencing and look at pictures and figure out what you want to do. Understand what the biggest thing you're going to drive through it is, and be aware of about getting a lawnmower back there, right? Because or any kind of piece of equipment that you might use on a regular basis. Because if just getting a lawnmower through, depending on the size of lawnmower you have, it matters. If you hire a lawn service and he's driving a 72-inch zero turn, you've got a 48-inch gate, you just killed your ability to get your lawn cut. So do be aware of that. And I'm not saying everybody needs a big gate or anything like that, but think about gates. Think about access into that property. Literally like on barbed wire fence, when you put in barbed wire fence, most barbed wire fence gates are basically just barbed wire wrapped around a post, and believe it or not, that works, and it'll keep a cow in. You can wrap it around there, and so it's just as simple. It can be as simple as that, or it can be a massive gate with an automatic opener on it, or all kinds of different things, and it just depends on what you're trying to do. So, on the commercial side, like there's plenty of gates that roll on rollers and they actually slide closed, right? So they open and close, and they're on automatic, they're on chain drive links.
Right.
So all things to kind of plan for, right? All kind of things to be thinking about.
So for the homeowner, for most of the projects, let's say you're putting up a, wood fence, and so how much is how do they measure the cost of a fence? Is it by linear foot then, or yard, or I mean, how what kind of quotes would you probably be getting to put up a fence?
Yeah, so most fencing is done by the foot or the length. We'll call it the length. Could be yards, could be feet. It doesn't matter. They're gonna have an idea based on usually by the per foot figure, because it's just how you do it, So you're going to go. They'll get a perimeter rent, and then it really depends on exactly what materials you're putting up, because there's huge cost difference. And just to use a great example, barbed wire is much less expensive than privacy fence, solid boarded privacy fence, obviously, right? So that's just kind of what you need to think about. And then if you're using, say, for example, so they now make some fences are made out of composite materials. They tend to be more expensive than wood materials, right? Just the cost of materials is the biggest, is generally, installation basically is installation. About the only big difference between one type of fence and the other in the installation department is, do you concrete the posts in or not? And I'm talking very generally. But, if you're using wood, and are you using wooden posts or are you using metal posts, right? And again, depends on the type of fence, depends on the goals that you're trying to do. But that's digging a hole and putting in a fence post is pretty standard across all fence types. Even if you're putting up wire fence, you still have to put in metal fence posts, right? They're the kind you just pound in. But
yeah. So I got a couple more questions, and that is, I've always heard that the good side of fence goes towards the neighbors, right? Is that true? When I say the good side, that the rails face in towards the owner of the fence, if you were to put a privacy fence up.
Well, most installations will be that way.
Yeah. Okay.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Well, but that is actually your choice. It's not like a rule, Now, I will say this, that the regulatory people might have something to say about that.
Yeah, they had that up in Chicago where I grew up. They had a rule like that. So I guess the maintenance on a fence like that, and we're still going to talk about, let's say, a privacy fence, just for the sake of the argument here, is that, is it much like a deck that it's like every 3 years to stain it, or what's your thought on that?
Well, and so you're generally using some kind of a I'm going to say it's
sealer.
Yeah, you definitely want to put something on it every so often. And as you know, John, this particular job you're talking about, you notice there's some pickets that are missing in that fence and things like that. And some of those pickets broke, right? Well, why did they break? Well, because the guy never put anything on it, and after 10 years, they basically rotted away and fell down. So if you're doing a wood fence, it's a pretty good idea to have it painted, or as Huck Finn said, go whitewash the fence, right? Which is, you don't have to use great stuff, but you want to put something on it as a general rule. So yeah, just in general, it depends on the materials that you're using. Like, again, if you're using a composite material, gosh, you don't have anything to do to it. It's really nice. Now, it's more expensive up front, but at the same time, you don't have to worry about it down the road. We were talking about horse fence earlier, and if you're just wanting to do a decorative horse fence, boy, really consider vinyl, because it looks great, easy to put up, lasts forever. Now, it's not secure by any means. You can push it and push right through it. It's not a big deal. But if you just want like a 3-picket, or a 3-rail fence, think about doing vinyl if you want that horse fence type look. Because it actually comes out to be, it probably wouldn't cost you very much more than wood. But if you're doing a privacy fence, boy, you're going to get into it gets expensive. And fencing too. Yes. So privacy fences too are pretty expensive. We're going to, I don't remember what they are at like Home Depot and all, but you can go to Home Depot and look at the panels, or Lowe's and look at the panels, and they'll be in a range, of the particular styles. And they're generally measured in 8-foot lengths as a general rule. So you're dealing with 8 feet. So if you want to kind of get a ballpark number, you go out and walk the fence line. If you're going to, if you walk 100 feet, it's going to be $800 in materials plus the posts. So you got to add for the posts and the concrete if you're going to concrete it. So I can kind of give you a real quick idea of what it's going to cost for just the materials, if you have an idea. So,
wow, there's a lot more to fencing than just digging a hole, putting in a vertical post and a bunch of horizontals, and or however you want to do it.
So it gets even more involved. So if your yard is not flat, right?
Oh yeah, well sure.
Okay.
Oh
so,
yeah. Oh,
so
yeah.
how do you contour to the shape of the ground, right?
Yeah.
And if you talk so when we had a real heavily contoured fence, there's a couple of ways to do it. What we did is we built our own fence panels when I was working at this fence company. So we actually built our own fence. When we had a highly contoured yard or a piece of property, the way we actually built the fence was we had jigs set up where they were generally 3-rail fences where there was 3 rails and the privacy boards were added to it. But if it was a fence that was going on a contoured yard, we put 1 nail in the center of each picket, and that allowed us to actually rack the fence. Right, if you understand. So
yes, I understand. Yeah,
right, as we and that would allow us to contour the fence. Now the fences that you buy at Home Depot and that sort of thing, they all have 2 nails in them. So you can do it, but it's really, really hard. So if you have a modest, we'll call it a modest, if you're trying to go up a foot over 8 feet. Well, even that would be kind of a lot. But if you're trying to go up 6 inches, you can generally pull that down and make it work. But if if you've got a really hilly yard, you need to actually either have them made, or you're going to pull all the nails and put a single nail in the center so you can rack it. Otherwise, you'll notice this now that I tell you this, you'll see where guys go out and you'll see this drop and you'll see these drops, and it looks, in my opinion, it looks very unprofessional, kind of goofy looking. Right. And I say that to you, John, and you've popped one of those into your head, haven't you, somewhere?
Yeah. Right.
So
absolutely. No, that's funny. Well, I mean, just talking this out especially for everybody out there that's listening, when you're talking about a fence, there's a lot more to it, and it's just kind of some of the other things that we've talked about in the past here. Is you set your goals, your expectations, you're preparing for it, and planning for it, because there's a lot going on for just a fence.
Yeah, really just think it through. It's not above a DIYer. I mean, it's really not. It's most fencing is, I'm going to call it, relatively simple to put up. I will tell you that I don't know of any fence, if you're digging the holes, unless you rent an auger, right? I don't know of any fence that it doesn't require a lot of physical labor. Okay.
Right.
Even if you're just putting up a wire fence, and you're going to put so wire fence can be put up on the metal poles, the ones that have the kind of funky spade in the bottom, and you have there's a thing that's looks like a piece of pipe with 2 handles on it, and it has a cap on it, and you just hit the top of it, and that knocks it down into the ground. And while that seems easy,
no, after about 20 of those things, after about 8 of them, yeah, right.
It's a pretty good workout,
Yeah, it is.
It's a pretty good workout. And so just, I think one of the biggest things is just be prepared that it is a pretty big workout. It's very rewarding, right? I mean, when you get it done, it's done, and it's beautiful. And if it helps you achieve your goals, you're in perfect place. So I want to make a quick comment on dogs. I had mentioned Jack Russells earlier. So I had 3 Jack Russells at one time, and I actually had taken them over to a friend's house, and they had a chain link fence. It was actually was it a 6-foot chain link fence? It was pretty tall. Yeah, it was probably 6 feet. Maybe it was 5 feet. Anyway, it was pretty tall. And Jack Russells I loved my Jack Russells. They were fantastic dogs, all of them. But there's 2 issues about Jack Russell Terriers. Number one is they have this incredible prey drive. So if they see something, they really want to go after it, and I don't care what it is. They do think they're the biggest dog in the world, by the way, even though they're small. But they will go after things. So they are very crafty little dogs. They were originally bred to go after rats and things like that, but they're diggers. So they will dig under your fence. If you have a dog that is a digger, you have to be aware that you might need to actually bury part of your fence into the ground so that they cannot dig under it. All right. These are things that people don't think about sometimes. And sometimes you just put, like if you're putting up a wood privacy fence, sometimes you actually have to bury some wire down underground so the dog can't get out if they're a real digger. Jack Russells are real diggers. Another factor with Jack Russells is I watched my Jack Russell go over the top of that 6-foot fence. He didn't jump over it. He climbed it and went over the top. I couldn't even get to him. He went up and over that fence like a 3-year-old can take off and get out of your sight faster than you can get to him. I mean, that little devil went right over the top, and thank God he did not catch the neighbor's cat, because that cat didn't realize how close it was to losing its life. But be aware that just because your
dogs, I mean, you're exactly right. You really do have to plan that out, because dogs will, if you're going to do it, dogs have a way of, they're escape artists.
Yeah, they really are, or they can be. They can be, and your dog. So if you're trying to keep your dog in, just be aware that there's lots and lots of ways that they'll go. They'll go over, under, around. Don't leave the gate open. Have a good closer on the gate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, John, any other questions on fencing?
No, this has been great. I think this really it's a real good primer for people out there that are thinking about putting in a fence. And a lot of good information to be thinking about before you start and during the project.
Yes,
so I really appreciate it.
And one last comment on fencing. So if you do live in the North Atlanta area, please don't call John and I to do fencing, because that ship, much like doing roofing on a high-pitched roof, has sailed.
Yeah.
So we are done doing fencing. I will do repairs.
Right.
But
maybe 40 years ago, but not now.
but not
so.
now. It is what it is.
All right.
Well, folks, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Handyman Pros radio show. A couple of things. Please join our Facebook page at Handyman Pros. Send us an email at questions@Handyman Pros Radio Show. Or if you go to our homepage at handymanprosradioshow.com, we now can take a voice message. So if you would like, you can click up on the right-hand corner. It says leave us a message. It's going to take you over, and we'll actually record your voice message. We are going to start doing some of that stuff. We really want to play out your comments, questions, concerns, whatever it is that you have. So drop us a line and let us know. John, I seem to see a spaceship landing in my backyard right now.
That's right. And I'm taking it apart, man. I got to know how that thing works.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.